He stood in the principal's office holding a trash bag containing his textbooks, his notebooks, and the single extra shirt he kept in his locker in case the one he wore got dirty during his after-school janitorial shift. The principal sat behind an expensive desk, arms crossed, looking satisfied, like he'd just solved a problem rather than ruined a life. The expulsion papers were already signed. The decision was final, and the reason, stripped of bureaucratic language, was simple. The student was poor, and poor students were problems. They brought down test scores. They made the school look bad. They didn't belong. The principal expected the boy to leave quietly, maybe cry, maybe beg for another chance. Instead, he just looked at the principal with calm, knowing eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen hardship and learned patience, and walked out. The hallway was full of students changing classes. They watched him leave carrying his trash bag of belongings. Some whispered, some laughed. Most just looked away, relieved it wasn't them. What none of them knew, what the principal couldn't have imagined, was that the broke kid they had just expelled had spent the past 8 months working as a research assistant for one of the most powerful men in technology. And when that billionaire heard what happened, when he learned that a school had expelled brilliance because it came wrapped in poverty, he didn't make a phone call. He got in his helicopter. You are about to witness what happens when a system designed to educate forgets who it's supposed to serve, and learns that worth isn't measured in dollars, but in character, intelligence, and potential that some people are too blind to see. Monday, October 16th, 2023. Jefferson High School, a public school in North Seattle serving approximately 800 students from mixed-income neighborhoods, some from the wealthier areas near the University District, others from low-income housing projects 3 miles south. The school building was typical for Pacific Northwest public education, built in the 1970s, renovated poorly in the 2000s, showing its age in cracked linoleum floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and lockers that stuck when it rained. The facilities were divided sharply. The newer science wing, with its modern equipment, served AP students from wealthier families, while the older vocational wing, with its outdated computers, served students tracked into practical education, a polite term for those the system had already written off. Daniel Okafor was 17 years old, a junior, and firmly in the category of students the system had written off. He was Nigerian-American, the son of a single mother who worked as a certified nursing assistant at a care facility, pulling double shifts 3 days a week to afford their small apartment in subsidized housing. Daniel was tall for his age, nearly 6 feet, with the kind of lean build that came from not always having enough to eat rather than from athletics. He wore the same rotation of 4 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans throughout the year, clothes from donation centers that were clean but worn, that fit adequately but weren't stylish. That marked him immediately as poor in a school where brand names mattered. He carried his belongings in a backpack that had been patched multiple times with duct tape, the original material worn through at stress points. His sneakers were generic, the soles separating slightly from the uppers. His haircut was simple and done at home by his mother every 3 weeks. Everything about his appearance said limited resources, but his mind was extraordinary. Daniel had taught himself Python programming at age 12 using free tutorials from the library's public computers. By 14, he'd built his first app, a simple tool for tracking medical shifts that his mother's coworkers used. By 15, he'd won a regional coding competition that no one at his school had bothered to help him enter. He'd founded himself, submitted his work himself, and attended the award ceremony alone because his mother had been working. By 16, he'd caught the attention of Dr. Richard Castellano, a computer science professor at the University of Washington, who'd been judging that competition. Dr. Castellano had been so impressed that he'd offered Daniel a position as a research assistant in his lab, an unprecedented opportunity for a high school student, usually reserved for graduate students. For the past 8 months, Daniel had been working with Dr. Castellano 3 afternoons a week and Saturdays, contributing to cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence and machine learning. The work was beyond high school level. It was beyond most undergraduate level. Daniel was helping develop algorithms that would eventually be published in academic journals, that had attracted interest from tech companies, that represented genuinely novel contributions to the field. But Jefferson High School didn't know any of this, because Daniel had learned early that Talking about his achievements invited jealousy, mockery, or disbelief. Better to stay quiet. Better to be invisible. Better to survive high school and get out. The trouble started in third period, in Mr. Harrison's economics class. Mr. Harrison was 53 years old, white, with 30 years of teaching experience and a deep-seated resentment of students he deemed unmotivated. He taught economics with a particular worldview, that success was the result of hard work, that poverty was the result of poor choices, that the free market rewarded merit. Students from wealthy families loved his class. It validated their privileges earned. Students from poor families hated it. It blamed them for circumstances beyond their control. Daniel sat in the back row, taking notes on paper rather than a laptop because he didn't own a laptop. Around him, students tapped on MacBooks and iPads, devices that cost more than his mother's monthly rent. Mr. Harrison was teaching about investment strategies. The key to building wealth, he said, pacing at the front of the room, is to invest early and consistently. Even small amounts. If you're putting away $100 a month starting at age 25, by retirement, you'll have substantial savings. Daniel's pencil paused on his notebook. The math was correct, but the premise was absurd. $100 a month assumed discretionary income that many families didn't have. It assumed stable employment, health insurance that didn't consume entire paychecks, housing costs that left room for savings. "Sir," Daniel said quietly, raising his hand but speaking before being called on, because Mr. Harrison often ignored hands from students like him. That strategy assumes baseline financial security that a lot of people don't have. If you're choosing between food and rent, you're not investing $100 a month. The classroom went quiet. Several students turned to look at Daniel, some with interest, others with the kind of discomfort that comes from hearing poverty mentioned explicitly rather than euphemistically. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened. "Mr. Okafor, if people prioritized financial discipline instead of making excuses, they wouldn't be in that position in the first place." "That's not accurate," Daniel said, his voice still calm but firm. "Systemic poverty isn't about individual choices. It's about lack of access to education, healthcare, childcare, transportation, structural barriers that investment strategies don't address." "I don't recall asking for your opinion on structural barriers," Mr. Harrison said, his tone icy. "I'm teaching economics, not social justice." "Economics is inherently about resource distribution," Daniel countered. "Ignoring inequality in economics is like ignoring gravity in physics. It's a fundamental force that shapes everything." The room was silent now, students watching the confrontation with the morbid fascination of people watching a car crash. No one contradicted Mr. Harrison. No one challenged authority, especially not students like Daniel. Mr. Harrison's face flushed red. "That's enough. You're disrupting class." "I'm participating in class," Daniel said. "You presented an economic model. I'm pointing out its limitations. That's literally what economics is, testing models against reality." "Office, now." Mr. Harrison pointed at the door. Daniel didn't move. "For what? Disagreeing with you?" "For insubordination. Get out of my classroom." Daniel gathered his notebook and patched backpack slowly, deliberately. He walked to the front of the room, and as he passed Mr. Harrison's desk, he said quietly, not loud enough for the class to hear, but loud enough for Mr. Harrison, "You're teaching them that poverty is a personal failing instead of a systemic problem. That's not economics. That's ideology." Mr. Harrison's jaw clenched. "Keep walking, Mr. Okafor." Daniel walked out of the classroom and headed toward the principal's office, knowing that this wasn't going to end with a warning. Mr. Harrison had been looking for an excuse to remove him from class for weeks. Daniel's presence was a reminder that poor students could be smarter than rich ones, and the contradiction made Mr. Harrison uncomfortable. The administrative office was a cluster of rooms in the front of the school. Reception area with uncomfortable chairs, attendance clerk behind a sliding glass window, vice principal's office on the left, principal's office on the right. Daniel sat in the reception area waiting, watching as Mr. Harrison arrived 5 minutes later, walked directly into the principal's office, and closed the door. 20 minutes passed. Daniel did his calculus homework, ignoring the stares from staff members who walked past. Then the principal's door opened. Principal Robert Chandler stood in the doorway, a white man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in A suit that cost more than Daniel's mother made in a month, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been questioned by anyone who mattered. Mr. Okafor, my office. Daniel stood, gathered his backpack, and walked into the principal's office. The room was expensively furnished for a public school administrator. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, framed certificates and awards covering the walls, a window overlooking the athletic fields where the football team practiced, a view that reminded everyone who entered that Principal Chandler presided over success. Mr. Harrison sat in one of the chairs, arms crossed, looking vindicated. "Sit," Principal Chandler said, gesturing to the empty chair. Daniel sat, placing his backpack on the floor beside him. Principal Chandler settled into his chair behind the desk, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Harrison tells me you were disruptive in class today, that you challenged his teaching, argued with him, and refused to stop when asked." "I disagreed with an economic model he presented," Daniel said calmly. "I didn't argue. I offered a counterpoint based on empirical data about poverty and resource access." "You questioned his authority," Principal Chandler said. "I questioned his claim that poverty is primarily caused by poor individual choices rather than structural inequality. Those are different things." Principal Chandler's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Okafor, I've been reviewing your file. Your attendance is irregular. Your participation in extracurricular activities is non-existent. Your family is receiving subsidized lunch. You're working a janitorial position after school. This paints a picture of a student who isn't prioritizing education." Each point was factually true but deliberately framed to suggest failure rather than circumstance. Irregular attendance because Daniel sometimes had to miss school when his mother was sick and needed help. No extracurriculars because he was working 2 jobs, janitorial at school and research assistant at UW, though the principal didn't know about the second. Subsidized lunch because poverty wasn't a choice. Working janitorial because rent didn't pay itself. "I have a 3.94 GPA, Daniel said quietly. "I'm ranked 7th in my class. I've taken every AP class available except ones that require textbook purchases I can't afford. I'm prioritizing education just fine." "Your GPA is impressive for someone in your situation," Principal Chandler said. The pause before situation, loaded with condescension. "But education isn't just academics. It's about respect, discipline, fitting into a community. And frankly, Mr. Okafor, you don't fit." The words hung in the air, their meaning clear. Daniel didn't fit because he was poor, because he challenged teachers, because his presence reminded wealthy students and their parents that poverty existed in their school, disrupting the illusion of a middle-class institution. "I see," Daniel said, his voice very calm, very controlled. He'd learned to control his reactions years ago, had learned that showing anger gave people an excuse to dismiss you as aggressive, emotional, problematic. "This isn't your first incident," Principal Chandler continued, pulling out a file. "Last month you were late to first period 3 times. Your explanation was that the bus schedule had changed, but other students managed to arrive on time." "Other students drive cars their parents bought them," Daniel said. "I take public transportation. When the 72 bus runs late, I'm late." "Excuses," Principal Chandler said. 2 months ago, you were sent to my office for not having the proper uniform for PE class. The requirement is athletic shoes and shorts. I had both. The requirement is appropriate athletic attire. Your shoes were old and your shorts had a tear." "They function fine," Daniel said. "The tear was small and I'd sewn it." "You're missing the point," Principal Chandler said, his voice hardening. "This is about standards. This is about maintaining an environment where all students can succeed. And students who constantly push boundaries, who question authority, who don't respect the rules, they make it harder for everyone else." Daniel recognized what was happening. Principal Chandler had decided before this meeting started. The incident with Mr. Harrison was just an excuse. The real problem was that Daniel was poor, visible, and refused to be ashamed. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "I'm expelling you," Principal Chandler said. "Effective immediately. You're a disruptive influence, and I won't allow you to interfere with the education of students who actually want to be here." The words landed like a physical blow. Expelled. For disagreeing about economics, for being poor, for existing wrong. "You can't expel me for disagreeing with a teacher," Daniel said, his voice still calm but with an edge now. "I'm not expelling you for that, Principal." Chandler said. I'm expelling you for a pattern of behavior, chronic lateness, dress code violations, disrespect toward faculties, general failure to meet the standards we expect at Jefferson High. Every reason was based on poverty, late because of buses, dress code because of old clothes, disrespect because he'd dared to disagree with a teacher's classism. I want to appeal this, Daniel said. You can submit an appeal to the school board, Principal Chandler said, pulling out pre-printed forms. He'd prepared them in advance, had known before this meeting that he was going to expel Daniel. The next board meeting is in 4 weeks. Until then, you're not permitted on school grounds. 4 weeks. A month of missed classes, missed work, missed credits. Even if the appeal succeeded, which was unlikely, school boards typically supported administrators, Daniel would be so far behind, he'd struggle to catch up. Do I get to say goodbye to anyone? Daniel asked. No, school policy is that expelled students leave immediately. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings from your locker. Security will escort you off campus. It was 10:47 a.m. Third period was still in session. The hallways would be empty. No witnesses to the humiliation except the security guard who'd walk him out like a criminal. Daniel stood, shouldered his backpack, and walked out of the principal's office without another word. Because what was there to say to someone who'd already decided you were worthless? Daniel's locker was in the E-wing, the oldest part of the building, where vocational and general education classes were held. The locker was number 847, assigned to him at the beginning of the year, painted industrial green and showing decades of wear. Security Officer Jim Morrison, a 60-year-old black man who'd worked at Jefferson for 15 years, and who'd always been kind to Daniel, stood a respectful distance away as Daniel opened his locker and began removing his belongings. There wasn't much. 2 textbooks, chemistry and English literature, both school-owned, both needing to be returned. 3 notebooks for different classes. A scientific calculator he'd bought, used from a graduating senior for $12. An extra shirt. A package of instant ramen he kept for days when he couldn't afford lunch, even with the subsidy. A photo of him and his mother at his middle school graduation, both smiling despite everything. He put it all in the trash bag that Officer Morrison had brought, because expelled students weren't given boxes or dignity, just trash bags like their belongings were garbage. I'm sorry, kid, Officer Morrison said quietly. This isn't right. It's fine, Daniel said, his voice flat. It's not fine. Chandler's been looking for an excuse to get rid of you since September. You know why? Daniel looked at him. Because you're smart, Officer Morrison said. You're smarter than his own kid, and you're poor, and that bothers him. Means the system isn't working the way he thinks it should. Rich kids are supposed to be smart. Poor kids are supposed to be grateful for whatever they get. You mess up that equation. Daniel didn't respond. He finished emptying his locker, shouldered his backpack, and picked up the trash bag. They walked through the empty hallways, past classrooms where teaching continued without him, past bulletin boards advertising college fairs and SAT prep courses he'd no longer attend, past the trophy case celebrating athletic victories he'd never been part of. As they passed the main office, the bell rang for passing period. Suddenly, the hallways flooded with students, a tide of teenagers laughing and talking and moving between classes. They saw Daniel, saw the trash bag, saw the security escort, and they understood immediately what was happening. Some stared, some whispered, a few looked genuinely sympathetic. Most just looked away, grateful it wasn't them, relieved that the system's cruelty was directed at someone else. Daniel kept his head up, his expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. One student, a girl named Maya, who'd been in his AP chemistry class, stepped forward. Daniel, what's happening? I'm leaving, Daniel said simply. Why? Ask the principal. Maya looked stricken. This isn't fair. No, Daniel agreed. It's not. Officer Morrison gently guided Daniel forward, and they continued walking toward the exit, through the front doors, down the steps, across the parking lot to the sidewalk at the edge of school property. This is as far as I can go with you, Officer Morrison said. School property ends here. You take care of yourself, son. And whatever you do next, you make sure it's big. You make sure they regret this. Daniel nodded, shook Officer Morrison's hand, and walked away from Jefferson High School, carrying everything he owned from that place in a trash bag. He walked to the bus stop 3 blocks away. waited 14 minutes for the 72 bus, rode it for 40 minutes to the university district, walked 6 blocks to the computer science building, took the elevator to the 4th floor. Dr. Richard Castellano's lab was a cluster of rooms filled with computers, whiteboards covered in equations, and graduate students hunched over code. Daniel found Dr. Castellano in his private office, a book-lined room overlooking campus, reviewing data on his computer. Dr. Castellano looked up when Daniel knocked. His expression shifted immediately from concentration to concern. "Daniel, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in school." "I got expelled," Daniel said, his voice finally cracking slightly, the emotions he'd suppressed for the past hour breaking through. Dr. Castellano stood immediately. "What? Why?" Daniel explained the incident with Mr. Harrison, the meeting with Principal Chandler, the expulsion based on poverty disguised as behavior problems. As he talked, Dr. Castellano's expression grew increasingly dark, not anger at Daniel, but fury at the system that had failed him. "That's unacceptable," Dr. Castellano said when Daniel finished. "You're one of the most talented students I've worked with in 20 years of teaching. You're contributing to research that graduate students struggle with. And they expelled you for disagreeing about economics?" "They expelled me for being poor," Daniel said quietly. "The disagreement was just an excuse." Dr. Castellano pulled out his phone and made a call. "Laura, it's Richard Castellano. I need to speak with Thomas immediately." A pause. "Yes, I know he's in a board meeting. Pull him out. This is urgent." He hung up and looked at Daniel. "Wait here." 20 minutes later, Dr. Castellano's phone rang. He answered on speaker. "Richard, this better be important," a voice said, smooth, confident, carrying the weight of authority. "I just excused myself from a meeting where we were discussing a $400 million investment." "It's important," Dr. Castellano said. "Thomas, do you remember the student I told you about? The high school junior who's been working on the neural network architecture? The kid who solved the optimization problem that stumped our PhDs? Of course I remember. His school just expelled him." Silence on the other end, then, "Explain." Dr. Castellano recounted the story. When he finished, the voice on the phone was ice cold. "What school?" "Jefferson High School in North Seattle. The principal's name is Robert Chandler." "I see. Where's the student now?" "In my office." "Put him on." Dr. Castellano handed Daniel the phone. "Daniel, this is Thomas Morrison. Well, talk to him." Daniel took the phone hesitantly. "Hello?" "Daniel, my name is Thomas Morrison. I'm the founder and CEO of Morrison Technologies. Dr. Castellano has been consulting for my company on an AI project, and he's told me about your contributions. I'm calling to tell you 2 things. First, you're not expelled. That decision will be reversed. Second, the principal who expelled you is going to regret his decision for the rest of his career. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said, not entirely understanding, but sensing that something significant had just shifted. "Good. I'll be in Seattle tomorrow morning. We'll resolve this. In the meantime, go home, rest, and don't worry, you're not alone in this." The call ended. Daniel handed the phone back to Dr. Castellano, confused. "Who was that?" Dr. Castellano smiled slightly. "Thomas Morrison. He's worth about $8.4 billion depending on his company's stock price. He's one of the most powerful people in technology, and apparently he's very interested in your situation." Daniel sat down heavily. "Why would a billionaire care about me getting expelled?" "Because," Dr. Castellano said, "he recognizes talent when he sees it, and he hates institutions that waste it. Now go home, get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be interesting." Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, 8:47 a.m. Jefferson High School's morning routine was proceeding normally. Students arrived via bus, car, and on foot, streaming through the main entrance toward their lockers and first period classes. Teachers stood in hallways, greeting students and monitoring behavior. Administrators handled the usual morning chaos. Attendance issues, schedule changes, a broken water fountain on the 2nd floor. Principal Chandler sat in his office drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Best Principal," a gift from a parent whose daughter he'd helped get into an Ivy League school, though, Helped meant he'd written a glowing recommendation for a mediocre student whose family had donated $50,000 to the school's athletics program. He was feeling satisfied. The Okafor problem had been solved. The student who'd made him uncomfortable, who'd challenged the natural order, who'd reminded everyone that poor kids could be brilliant, was gone. The school could return to its comfortable fiction that success was meritocratic, that students who tried hard succeeded, and that students who failed had only themselves to blame. At 8:52 a.m., Vice Principal Linda Chen knocked on his door. "Robert, there's a helicopter circling the school." Chandler looked up from his computer. "What?" "A helicopter. It's been circling for about 2 minutes. I think it might be landing on the football field." Chandler stood and walked to his window. Sure enough, a large helicopter, sleek, black, clearly expensive, was descending toward the school's athletic complex. "Call the police," Chandler said. "That's trespassing. They can't just land on school property." But even as he said it, the helicopter was touching down on the 50-yard line, its rotors kicking up dust and loose papers from the sidelines. In classrooms across the school, students were abandoning their lessons and rushing to windows. Teachers tried to maintain order, but gave up quickly. Whatever was happening outside was more interesting than conjugating verbs or calculating derivatives. "Everyone stay in your seats," teachers shouted, but students were already pulling out phones, filming, texting, posting to social media. The helicopter's door opened. A man stepped out. He was in his early 50s, white, with salt and pepper hair styled expensively, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost $10,000. Moving with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're the richest person in any room you enter. Behind him came 2 other people, a woman in professional attire carrying a briefcase, and a man built like security, ex-military, clearly there for protection. They walked across the football field toward the school's main entrance, the helicopter's rotors still spinning behind them, the pilot remaining ready for immediate departure. In the main office, chaos was erupting. The receptionist was calling the district office. Vice. Principal Chen was trying to reach the police. Principal Chandler was staring at security camera feeds showing the 3 people approaching the front entrance. And then they were inside. The main office's glass doors opened, and the man in the expensive suit walked in, followed by his 2 companions. The woman with the briefcase immediately approached the receptionist. "I'm Catherine Walsh, legal counsel for Morrison Technologies," she said, her voice professional and cold. "We're here to speak with Principal Robert Chandler regarding the unlawful expulsion of student Daniel Okafor." The receptionist stared, speechless. Principal Chandler emerged from his office, trying to project authority, despite the fear climbing his spine. "I'm Principal Chandler. You can't just land a helicopter on school property. I'm calling the police." "Please do," the man in the suit interrupted. "I'm Thomas Morrison, and I'm very interested in having law enforcement present while we discuss why you expelled one of the most talented students in this school based on his economic status." Chandler's mouth went dry. Thomas Morrison, the tech billionaire, the man whose company was worth more than the entire annual budget of Seattle Public Schools. "I don't know what you've been told," Chandler began, "but Daniel Okafor was expelled for behavioral issues." "He was expelled for being poor," Morrison interrupted. "Let's not pretend otherwise. Now, are we going to have this conversation in your office, or would you prefer we have it in front of the students currently filming this interaction on their phones?" Chandler glanced toward the hallway where dozens of students had gathered, phones raised, recording everything. "My office," Chandler said tightly. They moved into the principal's office. Morrison, his lawyer, his security, Principal Chandler, and Vice Principal Chen, who'd been summoned to witness. The door closed but didn't lock. Students pressed against the windows trying to see. Morrison sat down without being invited. "Let me be very clear about what's going to happen. You're going to reverse Daniel Okafor's expulsion immediately. You're going to apologize to him publicly. And you're going to undergo a district investigation into discriminatory practices at this school. Those are your best case outcomes." "Mr. Morrison, I understand you're upset, but—" "I'm not upset," Morrison said calmly. "Upset is what I feel when my coffee is cold. What I am is furious. Do you know what Daniel Okafor has been doing for the past 8 months?" Chandler didn't answer. He's been working as a research assistant in Dr. Richard Castellanos' artificial intelligence lab at the University of Washington. He's been contributing to research that my company is preparing to license for approximately $60 million. He's solved optimization problems that PhD students couldn't solve. He's written code that will be published in academic journals, all while maintaining a 3.94 GPA at this school and working a janitorial position to help his mother pay rent. Morrison leaned forward. And you expelled him because he disagreed with a teacher about economics, because he challenged the notion that poverty is a personal failing, because he made you uncomfortable by being brilliant while poor. That's not... I've reviewed the expulsion paperwork, Catherine Walsh interrupted, opening her briefcase and pulling out documents. The stated reasons are chronic lateness, dress code violations, and disrespect toward faculty. Every single reason is directly attributable to poverty, the bus schedule, worn clothing, and speaking truth to a teacher's classist ideology. She laid out more documents. I've also reviewed his academic record, 7th in his class, perfect attendance in AP courses, glowing evaluations from every teacher except Mr. Harrison, whose notes describe Daniel as argumentative for asking questions in class. Mr. Harrison is a mediocre teacher whose economic theories were challenged by a student smarter than he is, Morrison said, and you sided with him because Daniel Okafor's existence threatens the narrative you've built about meritocracy. Principal Chandler's face was red. You can't come into my school, and I absolutely can, Morrison said. Do you know why? Because while you were expelling brilliant students for being poor, I was making calls to the superintendent, to school board members, to the mayor. They're all very interested in why Jefferson High School expelled a student for poverty-related reasons in violation of district policy and federal anti-discrimination law. He pulled out his phone and showed Chandler an email chain. This is from your superintendent. She's requesting all documentation related to Daniel Okafor's expulsion. She'll be conducting a full review. And when she discovers that this is part of a pattern, when she finds out how many other low-income students have been pushed out of this school for similar reasons, there will be consequences. Chandler's hands were shaking. What do you want? I already told you. Reverse the expulsion, public apology, district investigation, and one more thing. Morrison's voice dropped to ice. You're going to resign, not today. That would make you a martyr, but within 6 months, you're going to quietly accept a position elsewhere. Because I will make it my personal mission to ensure that every college board member, every parent, every journalist in this city knows exactly what you did. You can't force me to resign. You're right, I can't force you, but I can make your life professionally unbearable. I can ensure that every decision you make is scrutinized. I can fund parent organizations that question your judgment. I can donate to school board candidates who will make oversight of your leadership a priority. I'm a very patient man, Mr. Chandler, and I have resources you can't imagine. Catherine Walsh laid out one more document. This is a reinstatement order. Sign it, and Daniel returns to school immediately with full credit for missed work, no disciplinary record, and a formal apology from you and Mr. Harrison. Chandler stared at the document. Everything in him wanted to refuse, to fight back, to maintain his authority, but he was practical enough to recognize when he'd lost. He signed the document. Good, Morrison said, standing. Daniel will return to school tomorrow. If there are any problems, any harassment, any retaliation, anything at all, I'll hear about it, and I'll be back. Do you understand? Chandler nodded mutely. Morrison walked out of the office. Students in the hallway parted like the Red Sea as he passed. He walked straight to the front entrance, across the parking lot, and back to the helicopter. As the helicopter lifted off, every student in Jefferson High School watched through windows, filming, understanding that they'd just witnessed something that would be talked about for years, the day a billionaire arrived to defend a student they had all dismissed. Wednesday, October 18th, 2023. Daniel Okafor stood at the bus stop at 6:47 a.m., his backpack repacked with his textbooks and notebooks, wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing when he was expelled because they were still the only clothes he had. The 72 bus arrived on time. He rode it to the school stop, walked the 3 blocks to Jefferson High, approached the main entrance. Officer Morrison was standing there, smiling. "Welcome back, son." Word had spread overnight. Everyone knew what had happened, knew about the helicopter, the billionaire, the confrontation in the principal's office. Social media had exploded with videos and commentary. The story had been picked up by local news. Billionaire defends expelled student. As Daniel walked through the hallways toward his locker, something had changed. Students didn't look away anymore. They didn't whisper. They nodded. They said hello. Some even apologized. "Hey, Daniel, I'm sorry I didn't say anything when they walked you out." "Daniel, that was incredible. Morrison really came in a helicopter. You're kind of a legend now." Daniel didn't feel like a legend. He felt tired of fighting systems designed to keep him down, tired of proving his worth to people who'd already decided he was worthless, tired of being exceptional just to be treated as equal. But he smiled and thanked people and made his way to first period. At 8:00 a.m., there was an announcement over the intercom. "All students and staff, please report to the gymnasium for a mandatory assembly." The gymnasium filled slowly, students confused, teachers exchanging glances. Principal Chandler stood at the microphone on a raised platform, looking like a man facing his own execution. When everyone was seated, he began. "Yesterday, there was an incident involving one of our students. Daniel Okafor was expelled from Jefferson High School. That decision was incorrect. Daniel has been reinstated with full privileges, no disciplinary record, and all missed work excused." He paused, clearly struggling. "I owe Daniel a public apology. The reasons for his expulsion were based on circumstances beyond his control, transportation issues, economic hardship, and a misunderstanding in class. I failed to consider these factors. I failed to see Daniel's considerable academic achievements. And I failed this school's mission to educate all students regardless of their background." The words were clearly scripted, probably by lawyers, but they were being said in front of 1,800 witnesses. "Daniel, if you're willing, I'd like you to come up here." Daniel stood from where he'd been sitting in the bleachers. He walked down to the gymnasium floor, across the polished wood, up the steps to the platform. He stood next to Principal Chandler, and for a moment, the power dynamic that had governed there. Relationship for 2 years was completely reversed. The principal who'd expelled him was now publicly apologizing. The student who'd been treated as worthless was now recognized. "I'm sorry," Principal Chandler said, extending his hand. Daniel looked at the hand for a moment. He could refuse it, could humiliate Chandler the way he'd been humiliated, could make him suffer. Instead, he shook it, because Daniel had learned something that Principal Chandler never would. That dignity didn't require cruelty. That strength didn't require revenge. That being better than someone didn't mean making them feel smaller. "Thank you," Daniel said simply. The assembly ended. Students filed out, buzzing with conversation. Daniel returned to class, where Mr. Harrison was waiting. Mr. Harrison looked like he'd aged 5 years and 2 days. "Daniel, can we talk?" They stepped into the hallway. Mr. Harrison looked at the floor. "I owe you an apology. What I said in class about poverty being a choice, about personal responsibility. I was wrong, not just wrong in front of the class, wrong in how I think about economics, about people, about students like you. Students like me, students who've experienced poverty, who understand these issues not theoretically, but practically. I've been teaching economics for 20 years, and I never listened to the students who actually lived the reality I was theorizing about." Mr. Harrison looked up. "I'd like to invite you to co-teach a unit on economic inequality. Use your perspective, challenge my assumptions, help the class understand what I clearly don't." Daniel considered. This was more than an apology. This was a real change, an actual attempt to do better. "Okay," Daniel said. "I'll do it." The rest of the day proceeded almost normally. Classes happened. Students learned, bells rang. But there was an undercurrent of change, a sense that something fundamental had shifted. At 2:30 p.m., Daniel left school and took the bus to the university. He arrived at Dr. Castellano's lab at 3:15 p.m. Dr. Castellano was waiting with Thomas Morrison. "Daniel," Morrison said, shaking his hand, "how was your first day back?" "Surreal," Daniel admitted. Morrison smiled. "I imagine so. I wanted to talk to you about your future. Dr. Castellano tells me you're planning to apply to colleges next year." "Yes, sir. I'm looking at state schools with good computer science programs." somewhere I can afford with financial aid and scholarships. What if I told you that you don't have to limit yourself based on cost? Daniel looked at him cautiously. Sir, Morrison Technologies has a scholarship fund. We identify talented students in technology and cover their full expenses for college: tuition, room, board, books, everything. Dr. Castellano has nominated you. If you accept, you can apply to any school you want: Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon. Cost is not a factor. Daniel felt tears welling, despite his best efforts to stay composed. Why would you do that? Because talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity isn't, Morrison said. Because I grew up poor too. Because someone gave me a chance when I needed it. And I've spent 30 years trying to pay that forward. Because you're exactly the kind of student who should be at a top university, and poverty shouldn't prevent that. He handed Daniel a folder. This has all the details. No strings attached, no obligation to work for my company, though I'd certainly hire you if you wanted. Just a chance to pursue your education without financial barriers. Daniel opened the folder. The scholarship covered everything. $80,000 per year for 4 years, adjusted for cost of living, with additional funding for graduate school if desired. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Morrison suggested. Yes, Daniel said. Yes, thank you. Morrison smiled. Good. Now let's talk about your research. Dr. Castellano says you're close to solving the recursive optimization problem. I'd love to hear your approach. And for the next 2 hours, a billionaire and a high school student sat in a university lab discussing artificial intelligence, treating each other as intellectual equals, proving that merit had nothing to do with money and everything to do with mind. Epilogue. 6 months later. April 2024. Daniel Okafor stood in the school gymnasium again, but this time he wasn't being humiliated. He was being celebrated. Jefferson High School's annual awards ceremony was happening, and Daniel was receiving the Principal's Award for Academic Excellence. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Principal Chandler handed him the award. Chandler was still principal, but barely. He'd announced he'd be accepting a position at a small private school in eastern Washington starting next year. No one was sad to see him go. Daniel Okafor, Chandler announced to the assembled students and parents, has demonstrated exceptional academic achievement, contributing to college-level research while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. He's been accepted to Stanford University, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon with full scholarships to all three. He's chosen Stanford, where he'll study computer science and artificial intelligence. Applause filled the gymnasium. Daniel's mother sat in the front row, crying with pride, wearing her nursing scrubs because she'd come straight from work and hadn't had time to change. After the ceremony, Thomas Morrison approached. He'd been sitting in the back, attending quietly because he'd donated $2 million to the school's technology program, with the stipulation that the funds be used to provide laptops and internet access to low-income students. Congratulations, Morrison said. Thank you for coming, Daniel replied. Wouldn't miss it. I wanted to tell you something. The research you did with Dr. Castellano, we're publishing it next month. Your name will be on the paper. You're 17 years old, and you'll have a publication in a peer-reviewed journal. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Daniel smiled. I'm starting to. Morrison handed him an envelope. One more thing. This is an internship offer for this summer. Paid position at Morrison Technologies. You'll work with our AI team, learn the business side of technology, and get a sense of what you want to do after Stanford. Daniel opened the envelope. The internship paid $15,000 for 10 weeks, more money than his mother made in 6 months. I don't know how to thank you, Daniel said. Don't thank me. Just do what you've been doing. Be brilliant. Work hard. And when you're successful, not if, when, remember what it felt like to be underestimated. Remember what it felt like when institutions failed you. And use your success to fix those systems for the next kid who's sitting where you were. I will, Daniel promised. Morrison left. Daniel rejoined his mother, who hugged him fiercely. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. I learned from the best, Daniel said. They walked out of the gymnasium together, past the trophy case that now included a plaque. In recognition of Daniel Okafor's contributions to research in artificial intelligence and his embodiment of academic excellence. The same hallways where he'd been walked out carrying his belongings in a trash bag now celebrated his achievements. The same school that had expelled him for being poor now claimed him as a success story. Daniel knew the irony, knew that the system hadn't really changed, knew that other poor students were still being pushed out, still being underestimated, still being told they didn't belong. But he also knew he was going to Stanford. He knew he had allies now. He knew that he'd proven that poverty wasn't destiny, that brilliance could emerge from anywhere, that the only real failure was the failure to see potential in everyone. As he and his mother walked toward the bus stop, Daniel looked back at Jefferson High School one last time. He didn't feel anger anymore. He felt determination. He was going to succeed so spectacularly that no one would ever be able to dismiss a poor student again without remembering his story. He was going to build something so significant that the principal Chandlers of the world would think twice before assuming poverty meant inability. He was going to change the system that had tried to destroy him. And it all started because someone, a billionaire who remembered being underestimated, had believed in him when it mattered most. They expelled him carrying his belongings in a trash bag because he dared to challenge a teacher's claim that poverty was a personal failing. They watched him walk through crowded hallways, humiliated in front of students who looked away, relieved it wasn't them. The principal sat in his expensive office feeling satisfied, convinced he'd solved a problem, maintained standards, protected the school's image. No one asked what the broke student did after school. No one cared that he was brilliant. No one bothered to see beyond his worn clothes and patched backpack. They just decided he was disruptive, problematic, someone who didn't fit, and they threw him away like garbage. But the quiet student they dismissed had spent 8 months working with a university professor, solving problems that PhD students couldn't solve, contributing to research that would be worth millions. And when a billionaire learned that brilliance had been expelled for being poor, he didn't make a phone call. He got in his helicopter. The next morning, while the school ran its normal routine, classes and announcements and students who'd already forgotten about the boy who'd been expelled, a helicopter appeared in the sky. It circled once, then landed on the football field. And from that helicopter stepped one of the most powerful men in technology, flanked by lawyers and security, walking into the school with a simple message: "You expelled the wrong student." Within hours, the expulsion was reversed. The principal was facing district investigations. The teacher who'd started it all was being required to rethink his entire curriculum. And the student they had called broke was being offered full scholarships to Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon. The system had tried to destroy him for being poor, but poverty had never been his defining characteristic. His brilliance was, his work ethic was. His refusal to accept that economic hardship meant he deserved less was. And when someone with power recognized those qualities, when Thomas Morrison saw what the school had been too blind to see, everything changed. Not just for Daniel, but for every student who'd been watching, who'd been told that poverty was destiny, who'd been treated as less than because they had less than. The helicopter didn't just bring a billionaire, it brought proof that worth isn't measured in dollars. That potential exists everywhere if people bother to look for it, that the only real poverty is poverty of imagination, the inability to see brilliance in unexpected places. Principal Chandler had assumed that being broke meant being broken, that economic struggle meant intellectual mediocrity, that a student who took the bus and wore patched clothes couldn't possibly be exceptional. He was wrong, catastrophically wrong, and his wrongness cost him his reputation, his career, and any claim to moral authority. Because Daniel Okafor was never the problem, the system that judged him by his circumstances rather than his character was the problem. The institution that expelled brilliance because it came wrapped in poverty was the problem. The adults who'd failed to see, to listen, to care were the problem. The helicopter arrival wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, about forcing a system to confront its failures, about making sure that one student's experience sparked change that would protect others. Some students are broke in resources but rich in potential. And when you're too blind to see the difference, when you throw away talent because you can't see past economics, you don't just fail that student, you fail everyone. The real lesson wasn't that billionaires should rescue exceptional students. The real lesson was that exceptional students shouldn't need rescuing in the first place, that schools should celebrate brilliance regardless of bank accounts, that poverty should be treated as a circumstance to support, not a character flaw to punish. Daniel Okafor didn't need a helicopter to prove his worth. He'd always had worth. The helicopter just made everyone else finally see it. If this resonates, if you've been underestimated, judged by your circumstances, dismissed because you didn't look like success was supposed to look, hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that potential isn't determined by economics, that brilliance exists everywhere, and that the only real failure is failing to see it. Subscribe for stories about systems confronted, underdogs vindicated, and the moments when power is used to protect rather than oppress. Remember, being broke is a temporary financial state. Being broken requires giving up, and some students refuse to break no matter how hard the system tries to break them. Those are the ones who change the world, and sometimes they get a helicopter.